When my brother and I were late teenagers, where it was only a couple of years between us, we got this special deal, and that was a 2-for-1 bungee jump. Now, I mean, how do you turn down an opportunity like that? 2-for-1, 2 jumps, we could both jump for the price of one. So anyway, we end up booked up, and we were heading to the venue where this was going to take place on the Gold Coast. And as we're driving there, we're bantering over, oh, I want to go first. And then my brother said, no, I want to go first. And we're back and forwards. And in the end, we both agreed that he would have the honour of going first. Until we arrived at the venue and we looked up at this contraption and we saw the jump, and he instantly turned to me and went, you can go first. And so a few moments later, I actually found myself in this crane. And you're sitting there at the back of this, there's a ledge at the front, and you're sitting back on this little seat. And this crane is slowly starting to climb into what seemed like the stratosphere. And as I'm going up, there's this operator who's strapping this oversized elastic band to my legs. Now, eventually we're getting up, and about halfway up, I actually went, sort of half glanced down and went, whoa, that looks like a long way down there. And we still had a long way to go. And the guy just said to me, don't look down. He says, just keep looking up. And so we actually climbed, and eventually this crane came to a stop, poised up there. And this operator says to me, he says, so this is how it's going to work. He said, what I want you to do, he says, to see out in front of the ledge there's that little camera. He says, I want you to look at that camera. And he said, I want you to stand up and really slowly, he said, I want you to start to shuffle towards the edge. And he says, and I'll tell you when to stop because you'll be there. And he said, the important thing is just don't look down. And so anyway, I remember getting up, and I stood up and I was following all these instructions, and I'm shuffling over, and I get close to the edge, and I can almost feel my toes hanging over, over thin air now. And I'm standing there looking fixed on this camera, and he says, that's good, stop. And he said, now don't look down. And so of course I went straight down. And I remember just going, whoa! And I was holding on to there's rails either side. And I just went, oh! And I said, man, there's been a big mistake here. I said, I should not be here. I said, I can't do that. I can't do it. Anyway, this operator, he went from just the standard sort of operator to the motivator. And this guy had done this before clearly because he'd seen this kind of behaviour. Anyway, he went into this big pep talk and this big pump. And in the end, I'm like, whoa, I'm feeling like wild. And he says, all right, here we go. I'm giving you the countdown. And it's going to be 1, 2, 3, bungee. 1, 2, 3, bungee! Now, I want to tell you that I did something that looked like this. This magnificent swan dive leap. But that would be sort of stretching the truth, because in reality, what I did later was described more as not a swan dive, but more of a chicken flap. Because my arms certainly weren't spread. They were moving as I went, but I sort of fell off the edge there. And to make matters worse, I sort of made this embarrassing kind of noise. It was like a, yeah, sort of like, it was a bit Elmo-ish like, and it certainly wasn't manly. Now, I can tell you it wasn't my finest moment. What saved me was that my brother did no better. And what really saved me is when I got down and spoke to this, sort of hanging my head in shame, chatting to this operator. He says, oh, don't feel bad about it, man. He says, I've seen a lot worse than that. And my ears prick up then. I'm thinking, yes, I want to know these sorts of stories. I say, what kind of worse are you talking about? He says, then he said, I've seen everything. I've seen people who sort of go to jump and then realise that they don't really want to do this, so they spin around. And he said, I've seen them sort of whack their shins on the edge and then fall into oblivion. He said, I had one guy who managed, impressively, to actually grab the edge, and he was hanging there at the bottom of at the bottom of the ledge. And he said, I'm looking over the edge going, what are you doing, man? And this guy's going, doing like the Le Mans breathing, going, it's all right, I can't hang here all day. And so he said, I just watched his knuckles turn white, and then eventually, and this guy too just fell into oblivion. If you've never gone bungee jumping, probably don't do it. But what I want to say is that the moment as I stood on the edge before I did my chicken flap was I was experiencing this thing that we call a stress response. And obviously that's not a picture of me, but this stress response, we all know what this is about. This is a stress response occurs when we're in a situation that calls for alarm. Right? It's actually it's our body's way of gearing up to either fight or take flight. right, to do something physically active, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Now, what we know is that stress and the stress response is actually a very helpful thing. However, as written here by Dr. Robert Sapolsky, he writes this, he says, for the vast majority of beasts on this planet, stress is about a short-term crisis, after which it's over with, or you're over with. And you know what? In the context of an emergency situation, in an alarming situation, to have this stress response where our heart rate increases so that it delivers more oxygen to our muscles, we start to sweat so that we can dissipate the heat that we're about to start producing, all of these things that occur in a stress response situation are helpful if they last a short time. When they go on for a long time, when our heart rate's elevated, when our blood pressure's doing this, when our gut function's doing crazy stuff, if that continues unchecked for long periods of time, that is when it becomes problematic. And that is where us humans have problems. Because so many of us today actually have this ongoing stress response ticking away in the background. About 3 out of 10 people report experiencing moderate to high levels of stress in their life. About 4 out of 10 people say during the day at work they feel stressed and anxious. And that presents a major problem for us. You see, stress, we know, is a feeling, right? And because it's a feeling, you know, people say, I feel stressed. Obviously the limbo is involved because it's your feeling centre. And what's intriguing is it's not just feeling, right, that's implicated in stress, but all of the other functions of the limbo as well. And just to recap on them, remember one of them was motivation. And we know this, when people are stressed, typically they either go, 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 or they stop, 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 stop. When they're exhausted and they run out. So this is why, you know, often a symptom of stress is just a ridiculously messy living environment. I don't know, when you have your own home, there'll be times when you will, because you're stressed out, it'll just be carnage. And then someone will come and knock on the front door and you say to the kids, don't answer the door, everyone just quiet, pretend we're not here. Because we can't let people see that we actually live like this. You know, things fall apart when we get stressed because we're unmotivated. What is intriguing, however, our motivation for food often changes as we become stressed. Have you noticed that, you know, when you get stressed, people typically crave sweet stuff. You know, we want, you know, the sugars and the fats. And there is a very scientific reason for that. And that is that stressed spelt backwards is desserts. And so, you know, it doesn't get better than that, the science, does it? You know, when your limbo wants to unwind, when it becomes unstressed, it wants you to eat desserts. But it's not just motivation. It's not just motivation, it's also things like our memory. We actually know that your memory is influenced by stress. When we get stressed, we can't process information as well. Our brain is in this state of alarm and we can't retain information as well either. We did a really fascinating study. I had a graduate student here who did a research project where we got college students and we set up this high platform where they had to lunge out and grab a bar and then catch it, and then we would lower them down. It was a stress-inducing activity, and we actually measured their stress response whilst they did it. But what we also did is we actually, just before they jumped, we actually exposed them to certain images, visual images, and also auditory sounds. And then after they jump, we say, how many of those things can you remember? And what we saw very clearly is that when you're anxious, when you're stressed, your memory just goes to pot. You can't recall things as well. So our motivations are affected by stress, our memory is affected by stress, because these are things that the limbo does, but also many automatic bodily processes are affected. You know, so things like heart function, we know is affected by stress. Things like gut function, we know is affected by stress. And things like immune function, our immune system is even affected by stress. In fact, there is a great story, I need to share this for you because I find this one of the most intriguing studies ever done, where researchers from the University of Iowa, they actually got couples to come in and they said, hi, we would like you to participate in this study. It's really simple. All you need to do is hold your arm out and we're going to give you a little blister on your forearm. And so they have this little suction device that's relatively painless, and this little device sucks away and creates a blister on their forearm. And they say, okay, thanks for that. Now come in and we'd like you to have a bit of a session with our friendly counsellor. And so these couple would sit down with this counsellor, and the objective of this first session was the counsellor would create warm fuzzies. And so he would say to the lady, hey, so tell me, where did you guys meet? And tell me about the wedding day. Tell me about your kids and some of the great stuff they're up to. And so after a while, they would identify, these great things that were happening in these people's lives. And by the end of the session, they'd go for about an hour. The room was just aglow. Everyone was got this warm, fuzzy thing going on. We're all holding hands, rocking backwards and forwards, singing Kumbaya. So, this was a great thing. Then the researchers would send these people on their way and say, thanks for coming. Come back in a couple of weeks' time and we'll do the same thing. And they're like, oh, that was lovely, wasn't it? Yeah. And so what the researchers would look at is how long did this wound take to heal after a session like that? Next time they came back, they did the exact same thing. They gave them this little blister wound on their forearm. But instead of then, in the counselling session, instead of creating all warm fuzzies, the counsellor actually picked a fight. And so he would turn to the woman and say, do you feel that your husband opens up and communicates effectively with you? And she'd go, "Argh." And then he'd turn to the man and go, how do you feel about your wife's spending habits? And he'd be like, "Argh." And as soon as he found the raw nerve, he'd just stoke the fire and then watch it burn, baby, burn. And this thing would go. Now, after the session, they'd send them on their way. And as we know, those of you who are married, of course, once an argument's over, it's over. Not. And so this thing probably dragged on for some time. But what the researchers observed is how long does it take for this wound to heal? Well, you know what they found? On average, it takes about 30% longer for a wound to heal after a 1 hour domestic as compared to a 1 hour warm fuzzy. The same things have been observed now in dental students where they administer these standard little wound to the hard palate, the top of the roof of the mouth of dental students, either just before exams, stressful period, or during their summer vacation time. And you know what they find? In the stressful exam period, it takes about 40% longer for the wounds to heal. So stress has a very real effect on our limbo and those many automatic bodily processes, including our immune system. So the big question is then, how can we de-stress? How can we live less stress? How can we achieve rest from stress? Well, I really like this analogy. You see, stress is a bit like a boiling pot. We actually need, it's not a bad thing to have, to have some pressure there, right? But it's when the pressure gets too much that the problems start to present. So what can we do to actually manage the pressure in this boiling pot that we often are? Well, there's two things we can do. Either you can turn down the heat or you can open the valves. Either way, you can actually help to manage the pressure. And indeed, we should endeavour, as much as we're able, to actually turn down the heat. And there are simple things we can do, like saying no. Can you do this? Actually, you know what? I actually can't do this at the moment. I've got so many other balls in the air. So sometimes knowing our boundaries and perhaps even lowering our expectations of ourselves can be really helpful for turning down the heat. But, what I want to tell you, it's a sad reality of life, is that sometimes you just can't manage the heat. Stuff happens. Accidents happen. You can lose work. You can get sick. The dynamics of life are challenging at times. And we get confronted with things that place a lot of heat on us. And if we don't have an ability to open valves, the pressure can really mount and stress can boil over and cause us all sorts of problems. So you know what? Whilst it's really worthwhile to try and turn down the heat, probably what's more important is having effective strategies for opening the valves. So what are they? What do they look like? Well, throughout this program, what we've been looking at are certain strategies, and we've actually got this little acronym, SMILERS. We haven't done the last S yet. I'm going to keep that mystery alive for our last session. But we've gone through these other factors, the SMILER principles, that we can use to actually influence our limbo and help us to live more happy, live more emotionally well. Well, it just so happens we can use these exact same strategies to help dial down the stress response, to actually de-stress. So let's look at how we can do that. And I want to use the analogy of a zebra. Because Dr. Robert Sapolsky, he's a lead researcher in the area of stress and its impact upon us. He actually wrote a fantastic book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Right? Why zebras don't get ulcers. And it seems that because zebras have limbos too, and zebras seem to do some things very well for helping them to manage this stress response. And we can learn a lot from the zebra. So here we go. We're going to go through the Smiler principles, how zebras utilise them, and how we can do likewise. Here we go. Number one, speak positively. You know what? To the best of our knowledge, we think, or we know, that zebras don't do this. They don't. You know, when on the savannah there, when they're lying there or standing there sleeping, and all of a sudden the sun starts to pop up and they open their eyes. To the best of our knowledge, we don't think that zebras then instantly go, I bet the lions are hungry today. Yep, I bet they are. You know what? It was a couple of days since old Black Ears got taken. Yep. I bet they're hungry. I can see it now. You know what? I can just see it. We're going to be standing at that water hole, and all of a sudden those lions are going to come pounding down that hill. And who are they? And I'm going to be the last to see it. I just know this. I'm going to be the last one. And then all of a sudden, who are they going to pick on? Yeah, look at me. I've got different stripes to everyone. I'm sure of it. I stand out in the crowd, and my legs, I think my legs are shorter. I can't run as fast. Oh man, this is so bad. I'm like a dead zebra walking. You know, zebras, we assume, don't actually do that. Only humans do that. See, humans have this ability to get up and then start to self-dialogue about the way things could go really bad that day. Do you do that? There's a good chance that maybe you do. So here's the thing though, we actually have an advantage over zebras in that whilst they don't speak negatively, they probably don't speak positively either, but we can. And so you know what? It can be very effective. Many people find just the act of saying things to yourself, like, you know what? Okay, there's a lot going on, but it's going to be okay. You know, one day at a time, it'll work out. You know, just speaking positively, many people find very effective for helping just to dial down the stress response. Don't talk it up, talk it down. Tip number one, learn from the zebra. Don't talk negatively. Speak positively. Here's number two, move dynamically. You know, if you ever watch a zebra being chased by a lion, the most remarkable thing happens. If you ever watch it on Discovery Channel or whatever it might be, here's how it pretty much unfolds. You see the zebra doing these ones. So here it is, like running, and here's this zebra going for this lion right on its tail going for it. But lions are actually they have fast twitch muscle fibres, which means they're really good for the sprint, but it means they get tired real fast, and they're generally quite lazy. And so what will happen is if the zebra is lucky and can keep it going for long enough, the lion goes, oh man, that's too hard. And so it gives up. And then as the lion starts to walk back to base with its tail between its legs, watch what the zebra does. The zebra does this. Having this massive stress response, because literally it's running for its life. And then it sort of has another check just to make sure that old lion isn't faking it, you know, not just bluffing. Yeah, it's definitely going back. Oh, that's good then. And then the zebra, quite literally, will go, yeah, okay. All right, back to the important business of eating grass. And it almost instantly returns to its lunch. It just had this massive stress response, and then all of a sudden it seems almost instantaneously calm again. How is it able to do that? Well, the secret is the fact that the zebra moved dynamically. You see, what the stress response is about is actually gears us up, as I alluded to earlier, for either fights, and no smart or living zebra does that, by the way, in the context of being chased by a lion, or to take flight. But you know, fighting and fleeing are actually physical pursuits. They're active endeavours. So the stress response actually gears us up to do something physically active. And guess what? It's the act of doing something physically active that actually brings the stress response back down. And this is where us humans fail. You see, do you know what the most commonly used strategy people use to manage stress? It's actually to sit in a sedentary way and watch a movie or watch television. So here we have this, the stress response. Our limbo is wide up. We're geared up for physical activity. And so what do? The exact opposite. We sit around. You know, there is overwhelming evidence to suggest the best thing, one of the best things at least, that you can do to help manage stress is to become more physically active. The act of moving dynamically actually draws back down the stress response. So now next time you're feeling stressed, resist the urge to sit and do nothing. Actually get out and move. I know for me personally, the more I have on, the more important it becomes for me to prioritise being physically active, get out and moving in a dynamic way. Zebras do it well. Learn from the zebra. So, we've learnt they speak positively, or at least they don't speak negatively. They move dynamically. And you know what? Zebras are very good, number 3, at immersing in an uplifting physical and social environment. I'll speak to this really quickly, but you know what? They spend their day in bright, sunny places where the air is fresh and all the sights and sounds of the natural landscapes are about them. Not only that, zebras are very good at hanging out with their friends. In fact, we know zebras actually have close-knit family communities, and that helps them stress less, gives them rest for stress. You isolate a zebra and watch what happens to their anxiety levels. And we are the same. Learn from the zebra. Immerse yourself in an uplifting physical environment and immerse yourself in an uplifting social environment. And then we come to look to the positive. You know, there's this interesting quote that says this. It says, if you are depressed, you're living in the past. If you are anxious and stressed, you are living in the future. If you're at peace, you are living in the present. You see, zebras don't worry. They just be happy. You know, zebras are not so future-focused that, this could go wrong and that could go wrong, that it dials up their stress response. We believe that humans are the only species that actually worries. And it's been suggested that worry is actually the greatest cause of human suffering. Can you identify with that? Worry is actually the greatest cause of human suffering. And the irony of it is that they say that probably 90 to 95% of what we worry about never actually transpires. You know, Mark Twain, the famous novelist, once wrote, he says, I've known a great many troubles, but most of them never actually happened. And it's true. By worry, we get stressed, we think forward. And worry is often a result of this future perspective. We're thinking ahead. We're always one step ahead and we've got all this stuff in our head. And by thinking about the future, we use tomorrow's energy on today. We need to stop this. We need to start worrying less. How can we do that? Well, there's a very popular activity now, and you would have heard of it before. They call it mindfulness. And essentially what mindfulness is, it's actually an ancient principle, right? We actually see it in many faith traditions. But essentially mindfulness is going, hey, let me not get so overwhelmed with what's happening then, potentially. Let me just focus on what's happening now. Let me give my attention to this moment. And in doing so, it can be incredibly liberating from a stress perspective. It takes the pressure off. Instead of having our mind full of all this stuff, we become mindful of what's happening in the here and now. And there are different forms of mindful activity. Some of them very, very simple. You can actually do mindfulness activities when you just go outside and sit there in silence for 15 minutes and just take notice of the things that are around you. Just listen to what's out there, things that we normally miss. Listen to the birds, listen to the wind. Or take notice of a particular thing that normally you wouldn't have taken notice of before. I actually consider photography a form of mindfulness in a sense, because what you're actually doing is focusing in, giving your attention to just this particular thing in time and space. And when we're in that space, we tend to be not full of all the other distractions that are happening in our lives. There are internal mindfulness type activities where you sit there and you actually perhaps close your eyes and just think about, how relaxed am I? You know, whereabouts do I feel tension in my body, and what can I do to actually try and relax that? How am I breathing? Am I breathing rapidly and shallow, or am I slowing down? Can I feel my breathing? Do I feel more relaxed? So you know what, mindfulness, this whole notion of actually taking time to be still, can be incredibly powerful for giving us rest from stress. And zebras do it very well. They live in the moment, not so much the future. Got a great little song that Mel's going to share with us now that really highlights this whole sentiment.
When it all goes quiet and I stop trying to fill all the spaces, I remember I hear a still small voice from the one I know, calling me home. When it all goes quiet, I hear your love calling me. I hear your love calling me. Nothing sounds as sweet when it all goes quiet. When it all goes quiet, you remind me nothing separates us apart from when I turn away, 'cause I am your child. You reconcile us, and you feel nothing for me but love. Where do I hide? I hear your love calling me. I hear your love calling me. Nothing sounds as sweet when it all goes quiet. And I've been lonely 'cause I forgot you and who you really are. You're not like me, love never failing. You're just waiting, always hoping that I remember, that I would hear you. Well, I hear your love calling me. I hear your love calling me. Nothing sounds as sweet when it all goes quiet. Well, I hear your love calling me. I hear your love calling me. Nothing sounds as sweet when it all goes quiet.
You know, some mindfulness activities are just one way that we can help to actually get rest from stress. But there's something else that zebras also do very well that you possibly wouldn't imagine. You know, zebras laugh. Zebras laugh out loud. L-O-L-Z. Laugh out loud, zebra. You know, intriguing enough, we actually know that all mammals actually laugh. And we know that laughing is an incredibly powerful and potent way to actually manage stress. In fact, we know that laughter is actually very, very helpful for people's health and well-being. A good bout of laughing, belly aching laughing, is actually as good for you as doing a physical activity session. And most people would probably rather laugh uncontrollably than do exercise. But you know, I've got to ask the question, when was the last time that you actually engaged in a really riotous belly laugh? You know those times, I love it when you're laughing away and it's like, do your cheeks ache? Like your cheeks going, oh, stop it, man. Oh, like this, and you're sort of like stretching your cheek muscles because they're just, you know, there's something really good about doing that. And if you need help with it, what I can tell you is that science actually indicates that you're about 30 times more likely to laugh in the presence of other people. So we've been learning about things that zebras do right for managing their stress, for getting rest from stress. And we've seen that they follow the Smiler principles. You know, they speak positively, they move dynamically, they immerse in uplifting physical and social environments. They look to the positive, they don't worry. You know, and so they live in the moment. And they laugh, which is a great thing to do. 2 more things. And the next one, eat nutritiously. We can move through really quick. You know what? Zebras eat whole plant-based foods. And we know they're really good for you. No, I'm not encouraging you to eat grass, but there are many other varieties of whole plant-based foods that we know actually can help people in terms of manage their stress and manage their emotional state. So do what zebras do, sort of. And then last of all, we come to this notion of rest, which is really one of the themes for this session. You know, we have never witnessed a zebra pop a sleeping tablet. So to the best of our knowledge, zebras actually sleep relatively well. So do that, what they do. But there's something else relating to rest that zebras also do really well. You see, zebras are very good at going and working in with the natural rhythms of life. And there are several natural rhythms to life. There are the seasons, yearly seasons. We know that zebras, they migrate backwards and forwards as the seasons change. They work in sync with nature in that regard. We know that they follow these circadian rhythms that we learnt about in a previous session, where, you know, they wake up, the sun goes up, the sun gets high, the sun goes down, it's night time. You know, they're in sync. Their biorhythms actually work in sync with this. And what, you know, I know from my own experience, when I was a university student, my job was to work as a lifeguard on it was actually quite a dangerous beach down on the rugged Victorian coastline. And, you know, as I remember, I'd be, for months on end during the summer period, all day I would be outside. I'd literally watch the sun come up, I'd watch it get high, I'd watch it get low. I'd watch the tide go out. I'd watch the tide come in. And what I can tell you is there was something incredibly peaceful and calming about getting in sync with these natural cycles, these natural rhythms. But you know what? There's another natural rhythm that it seems that humans are very much adept to, that we do very well if we follow it. And it's actually called a circaseptan rhythm. It's a weekly cycle. And what's intriguing about the weekly cycle, you know, this sort of 7-day cycle, is that there's no cosmological reason for it. You know, there is for a year and the seasons. It's, you know, when the Earth goes around the sun, the seasons change. There is for a day, you know, that the Earth rotates on its axis. We even know for a month, you know, the lunar, the moon going around the Earth. But there is absolutely no reason why we should have a 7-day weekly cycle. It's just that we seem to work really well, function really well when we obey that kind of behaviour. In fact, throughout history, we've actually seen examples like in France and in Russia where they've trialled different types of weekly cycles, like a 10-day cycle, which makes more sense. It's decimal after all. And yet we keep coming back to the 7-day cycle seeming to work very well for us. You see, what we've discovered is that there seems to be these circaseptan, these weekly cycles or these weekly rhythms to the way that we work. And we even know, there's many studies now to actually show that even our level of happiness and our emotional state fluctuates according to a weekly cycle, a weekly pattern. Like this study here. You can see that over the course of the week, our negative feelings tends to fluctuate. You can see there, it bottoms out. This is the red line. Bottoms out on Saturdays. Our positive feelings also follow a weekly cycle and they top out on Fridays and Saturdays. So there's a weekly cycle to this. We've actually even noticed, if you look at when people search for things like health, which intriguingly enough, do you know that one of the greatest causes of stress for people is actually concern about not their health, but what they're not doing about their health? And what we actually find is that when you look at the internet searches and how they fluctuate over the course of a week, we actually see that they bottom out on certain days, like Saturday being the prominent one. So it's almost like that we're geared for this. We need some rest. We need rest 1 day a week. This whole notion of a weekly cycle of 6 days on, 1 day off seems to work very well for us. And this is an ancient wisdom. We actually have a name for it. Many faith traditions have utilised it. It's very prominent in Judaism and Christianity. This notion of a Sabbath, where it is guilt-free, and that's the important part. It's guilt-free time out, where historically and traditionally there's no work, but it's a time where you celebrate the good stuff in life, and you prioritise. You restore balance. You put first things first. Your health, your happiness, your relationships, your spirituality. This is what this notion of Sabbath is about. And what we know is that when people practice that, 6 days on, 1 day off, one guilt-free, stress-free day off, that life goes very well for them. There's been studies on Jews who obviously follow a Sabbath protocol. And what we actually find is that, in fact, the publication that came out of this was called Death Rests a While. And what they find is that on the Jewish Sabbath, on Saturday, mortality rates, death rates plummet. And then they come back up again after the week. It's like death rests a while. And you think, maybe that's because, on their Sabbath, they take time out, it's less stressful. And yes, they do all that, but what's intriguing is that they also have other holy days that don't fall on a Saturday, fall throughout the week. And what we find is and they practice much the same behaviours as that they do on their Sabbath, on these other holy days, and yet there's no such dip in their mortality rates on those days. There's something about these circumseptan rhythms, this weekly cycle that works very, very well for us. And I want to challenge you with this. For me personally, I've actually grown up practicing this notion of Sabbath. And even through my busiest, craziest periods of life, I've always been I've had this guilt-free, where I've laid aside for 24 hours, 1 day in 7, where I've just gone, I'll pick it up again the next day. And you know what? People say to me, how on earth is that possible? Today everything's I don't have enough time in 24/7 to get everything I need to do. And my response to that is, test this and see. I've actually found from experience that by taking 1 day out, all of a sudden you get clarity. All of a sudden you are more efficient when you come back to it. And I find that taking that 1 day out in 7 actually helps me to be far more productive than I could be otherwise. To borrow the analogy of Stephen Covey, who wrote the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he says, we need time to sharpen the saw. If you ever tried to cut something and the saw starts to get blunt, you can keep going hard day in, day out at it, and you're very inefficient. You don't get far. But by taking time away from the task and actually sharpening the saw, when you come back to it, wow, you cut through so much more efficiently. And that's what a Sabbath is like. And so, I want to challenge you. Here are your 2 challenges for the week. Number 1, a daily challenge to either laugh out loud, 15 minutes, take some time, be intentional, find some space where you actually get a good old giggle up, right? And you can do that for 10 points each day, total of 100 points for the week. Here's your challenge. The other thing that you could try is a mindfulness activity. Find somewhere where you can just sit in silence for 15 minutes and just be really aware of what's actually happening around you in that moment, in that space and time. Try to be free from the distractive, intrusive thoughts of what's coming up and what I'm worried about and all of these things. So, 10 points each day, total of potential 70 points for taking the time out for a laugh out loud or 15 minutes of mindfulness. And here is the second challenge for 30 points. Take a guilt-free day off. No work. Just say to yourself, this is it. I'll pick it up again later. For me, I actually don't even open my computer. I don't check emails. Right? It's actually an offline time, right? Technology-free. And what I find is, personally, I just couldn't imagine life without it. I don't know how people do it without it. So there are your challenges. And what I'd like you to do as you go through and test these out, see if it makes a profound impact on your ability to live more happy.